Nobody is coming for you, he said, ripping the necklace from her neck. Nobody cares about someone like you. He was wrong. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. Before we go any further, if this is the first time you're finding this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's get into it. She had lived 78 years without asking the world for a single thing it wasn't willing to give. Evelyn Whitmore had learned that lesson early, the hard way, quiet way, the way that settles into your bones when you've spent a lifetime watching other people take up space while you made yourself smaller, light, more acceptable. She hadn't done it out of weakness. That was the part nobody understood about women like Evelyn. She had made herself small the way you make yourself small when you're standing in a storm, not because you're afraid of the rain, but because you're smart enough to know which battles the wind can win and which ones it can't. She had been a librarian for 31 years. 31 years of small hands reaching across wooden counters. 31 years of watching a child's face change the moment a story finally reached them somewhere deep and real. She had given thousands of books to thousands of children who needed them. She had memorized the look on a child's face when they found the right words for something they'd never been able to say out loud. She knew what it meant to hand someone a lifeline and call it a library card. Buried her husband, Gerald, 4 years ago, dramatically, not with falling apart. She had buried him the way she did everything with both hands, with patience, with the kind of grace that doesn't ask for applause because it was never meant to be watched. And every single day since the funeral, she had walked the same route she and Gerald had walked together for 50 years. Down Maple Street, past the old barber shop that had changed names 3 times but always smelled like the same aftershave, past the community garden that Mr. Kowalski still kept up even though his wife was gone too, and straight to Hargrove's grocery, where the owner still kept Gerald's favorite brand of coffee on the shelf, even though the supply chain had made it nearly impossible. That was Tuesday afternoon. That was supposed to be ordinary. But she had her canvas bag on her left shoulder. She had her phone in her coat pocket. She had Gerald's silver pendant hanging around her neck, a small compass rose that he had given her on their first anniversary. The one that had traveled with her through 50 years of marriage, through every argument and reconciliation, through every season of that long, complicated, beautiful life they had built together. She had stopped at the corner of Maple and 4th, dusting the bag on her shoulder when she first heard the laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter that was meant to be shared. It was the other kind, the kind that has a target, deliberate, shaped like a weapon. Hey, old lady. She didn't stop walking. I'm talking to you. She had spent 31 years managing rowdy middle schoolers with nothing but eye contact and a quiet voice. She knew exactly what that tone was. She had heard it from 12-year-olds who thought they owned the hallway. She had heard it from men twice her size who thought that because she was small and soft-spoken, she could be interrupted without consequence. She recognized cruelty dressed up as boredom the way you recognize a smell instantly, physically, without needing to think about it. She kept walking. That was when the first one stepped in front of her. It was maybe 22, maybe 23. He had the kind of face that might have been handsome once, or might have been handsome still, if anything warm had ever lived behind it. He was wearing a gray hoodie and a look that said he had decided almost before she even opened her mouth that she was nothing, that she was furniture, that she was a test he could pass without trying. "Where you going so fast?" he said, grinning at his friends. His name was Brandon Keller, though she didn't know that yet. She didn't need to know it. She had known him her entire life. She had known him in every child who ever sat in the back of the library and tore the corners off pages, not because they were angry at the book, but because they needed to be angry at something and didn't know yet how to say it. She had known him in every person who ever confused fear with respect. "Excuse me," she said, and she said it the way she used to say it to students, not as a question, as an apology, as a statement of fact, a redirection. "Are in my way, and I am asking you once to..." Brandon didn't move. He glanced back at the two others, one of them taller, standing with his arms crossed and his chin lifted. They're one younger, barely 19 if she had to guess, a half step behind the group in a way that told her this was new for him. It was not yet comfortable. This was still something he was auditioning for. Yes, I asked you a question, Brandon said. You asked me where I was going, Evelyn said. There she was home. Now, if you'll excuse me. She stepped to the left. He stepped with her. She stepped to the right. He stepped with her. That was when the smile disappeared from his face and something uglier came up underneath it. Something that had been waiting for the performance to be over so it could be itself. Look, you know what your problem is? He said, leaning in slightly. Look, you think someone's going to help you. You think someone out here is going to step up for you. He looked around at the street, at the people who were finding very interesting things to look at that were not this particular corner. You see anyone running over here? She followed his gaze. A woman on the other side of the street who had been walking her dog and had very suddenly become extremely focused on that dog. A teenage boy who had looked up from his phone, registered the scene, and looked back down. She saw the owner of the dry cleaners on the corner standing inside his window, watching, not coming out. Nobody's coming, Brandon said. On your own out here. Evelyn looked back at him. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. It was something older and steadier than either one. It was the thing that had gotten her through Gerald's diagnosis and then his decline. The thing that had kept her going back to that library every morning, even after they'd cut her budget 3 years in a row. The thing that had kept her being kind, even when kindness felt like giving blood to people who didn't know what blood cost. At Brandon Keller, and she said very quietly, Araz, young man, I have been here longer than you have been alive. We'll be here long after you figured out what you're doing with yours. I am going to ask you one more time to please step aside. Something flickered in his eyes. For 1 second, half a second, she thought she saw it. Underneath the cruelty, the thing that had been there before whatever had built all of this up around it. Then his hand shot out and grabbed her necklace. Snapped so fast, she didn't feel it happen until it was done. A cold, sudden absence against her collarbone where the weight of it had been. Just 50 years of memory. Gerald's face when he had clasped it around her neck for the first time. But of it in her palm on the morning of his funeral when she hadn't been able to decide whether to wear it or leave it on the dresser. Of it. She had not taken it off since. Brandon held it up. A pendant spun once in the afternoon light. Nobody's coming for you, he said. Nobody cares about someone like you. And somewhere deep in Evelyn's chest, something that had been very, very quiet for a very long time woke up. She did not scream. She did not cry. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone with steady hands, and she called the one person she knew would always answer. Whitmore picked up on the second ring. Was picked up on the second ring when it was his mother. The first because one ring wasn't enough time for him to make sure he was somewhere he could hear clearly. The third because 3 rings was 3 too many when it was her. That ring was the one that said, I'm here. I was ready. Michael. Her voice was calm. He noticed that immediately. There had 2 calm voices. The warm one, the ordinary one, that told him dinner was ready or that it was going to rain tomorrow. Ours. And this one was the kind of calm that people only had when they were actively choosing it. They were holding something very still that very much wanted to move. Up straighter. You okay? I'm on the corner of Maple and 4th, she said. A small situation. What kind of situation? A brief pause. A background. He heard something, a voice. Young. Or male. Something about the tone made the hair on his arm stand up. Well, she said, I think I'd like you to come down here. He was already standing. To me. Are you hurt? I am fine, she said. The very specific emphasis people use when they are telling the truth about one thing in order to avoid mentioning another. I am absolutely fine, but I think it would be good if you came. And maybe another brief pause, maybe a few of the others. He understood. 23 years with Hell's Angels had given him a vocabulary of understatement. To say nothing's wrong in a way that meant don't come alone. Or he knew how to hear I'm absolutely fine and translate it into move. I'm on my way, he said. Don't move, don't hang up. He stepped outside. Heather Whitmore was 51 years old and had the kind of presence that entered a room slightly before he did. And a big man in the way that made you think of professional athletes or bouncers. Well, he was big in the way that mountains are big, not because they're trying to take up space, but because that's simply what they are. He had the hands of someone who had fixed more engines than he could count, eyes of someone who had learned to read a situation before it fully developed, and the voice of someone who had discovered long ago that volume was for people who hadn't figured out how to actually be heard. He had come home to Silver Creek 3 years ago after a period on the road that he didn't talk about in specifics. Heather had asked him to come back, not directly. That wasn't her way. She had simply said during one of their Sunday evening phone calls that she was thinking about trying to plant a garden in the backyard and that she wasn't sure she remembered exactly how Gerald used to do the watering, and did Michael happen to remember. He had been in Silver Creek within the week. He had rebuilt his mother's garden fence. He had fixed the gutters. He had eaten Sunday dinners at her kitchen table every week without fail, Laura Adams, and he had watched her move through her grief with the same steady grace she brought to everything. But understood that being here was not a sacrifice. It was a privilege. And right now he was on the phone with her, listening to the sounds on that corner. And every instinct he had developed over 2 decades of learning when to move and when to wait was telling him the same thing. Move. He pulled out his other phone and sent a single message to the group chain. Mom, Maple and 4th. Now. He didn't need to say anything else. Dinner of Maple and 4th, Brandon Keller was still holding the pendant. He had expected the old woman to cry, expected her to get small and afraid, to look around desperately for someone who wasn't there, to demonstrate exactly the point he had been making to himself and anyone watching for the last several months, that the world was divided into people who took what they wanted and people who stood there and watched it happen to them. Instead, she was on the phone. She was on the phone, and she looked, and this was the part that was starting to irritate him. She looked bored. Bored for someone who had given up. The bored of someone who had already decided how this was going to end and was simply waiting for everyone else to get there. Calling. Who are you calling? He demanded. She glanced at him over the top of her phone, the way a teacher looks at a student who has asked a question she's already answered. She said simply. The taller one, Marcus, who had been watching from 2 steps back with his arms folded, let out a short laugh. Your son? Lady? Your son's probably in a nursing home somewhere. Evelyn looked at Marcus for a moment. Then she looked back at her phone. He'll be here shortly, she said. Something in her composure was beginning to have an effect on the crowd that had gathered. A large crowd. Silver Creek was not a city where people gathered dramatically. There were 8, 10, 12 people now, stopped at various distances, watching. The dry cleaner owner had come out onto his step. Another couple had paused their walk. A woman who had been getting into her car across the street had closed her car door again and was leaning against it. Elias Cole was 19 years old and had known Brandon Keller for 8 months longer than was good for him. Followed Brandon into 3 separate incidents that he still thought about at 3 in the morning, the kind of thinking where you lie in the dark and try to remember exactly where the decision was, is exactly where you could have turned left instead of right. He was watching the old woman. He was watching her not because she was interesting, but because she was the opposite of what he expected. Between his expectation and reality was getting wider with every second she stood there. There's straight-backed and calm, holding that phone to her ear like she was waiting for the most ordinary thing in the world. He said low, "Shut up, Darius." Brandon, I said shut up. Darius looked at the pendant in Brandon's hand, at the woman. He looked at the people watching, about the 3 a.m. thoughts, and felt them pressing up against the daylight in a way they usually waited to do. "This doesn't feel right," he said. Brandon turned to look at him. It was a very specific look, the look of someone who has built something and is now watching the foundation question itself. So do this right now, he said, quietly, dangerously. As you're saying, I know what you're saying, and I'm telling you, nobody is coming for her. Nobody is going to. That was when they heard it. Heard low, the way thunder starts not with the crack, but with the rumble, vibration that you feel in your chest before your ears have finished processing it. It built slowly, even without hurry, because hurry was for people who were uncertain about what they were doing. Engine, then 3, then 7, then 12. The sound came down Maple Street and it didn't stop. Brandon's hand slowly dropped to his side. The pendant hung from his fingers. Marcus uncrossed his arms. Darius took 3 quiet steps backward without deciding to. One by one, the motorcycles came into view at the far end of the block. In formation, not aggressive, not theatrical, not performing anything for anyone. They simply moved together the way people move when they've spent enough time with each other that they don't need to think about it anymore. A brotherhood, a family. At the front, slightly ahead of the others, there rode a man on a black motorcycle who looked like someone had carved him out of every consequence those 3 young men had ever successfully avoided. Pulled to the curb. The others pulled the curb behind him by one until the entire block was flanked. 12 motorcycles, 12 men who had ridden through 30 states and 17 years and every kind of road the country had to offer. 12 men who had received a text message that said, "Mom," and forth, now, and had not asked a single question. Whitmore put down the kickstand. He took off his helmet. He set it on the handlebars. He looked at the 3 young men. He didn't say anything to them. He walked straight to his mother. "Are you hurt?" That was the first thing he said. To the crowd, not to the men behind him. To her, looking only at her. Evelyn looked at her son, this 51-year-old man who had come home to fix her garden fence and eat Sunday dinner, who had driven through whatever was between him and this corner without stopping. Aussies were doing the exact opposite of what Brandon Keller's eyes had been doing. Here was where Brandon's eyes had been looking for vulnerability. Here was Michael's were doing something else entirely. They were checking her, logging, making sure she was whole. "I am perfectly fine," she said. "Okay." He exhaled once. Then he turned. He turned and he looked at Brandon Keller, and he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The street was so quiet by that point that if he had whispered, dry cleaner owner would have heard every word. "Of you," Michael Whitmore said, "has her necklace?" Brandon Keller had believed, approximately 45 seconds ago, that he understood how power worked. He was standing in front of a man who was about to give him a very different education. Talent dropped into Brandon's palm. His fingers didn't seem entirely under his control. Pulled it out. Michael walked forward, took it from his hand gently, the way you'd take something fragile, and turned back to his mother. Pulled it out to her. She took it and closed her fingers around it. "Again," she said, looking at the chain. "I know," he said. "Get it fixed." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. He turned back to the 3 young men. Now the men behind him had gotten off their bikes and were standing, arms folded, unhurried. 12 men who had learned the same way Michael had learned that the loudest thing you could do was nothing. On the sidewalk had doubled. The dry cleaner was standing at the edge of the sidewalk with his phone out. And he wasn't the only one. "Here's what's going to happen," Michael said. He was still speaking quietly, still not performing. "You're going to stay right there. A police report has already been called in. You're going to answer every question those officers ask you. Honestly, completely." Brandon said nothing. His jaw was tight. Eyes were doing the rapid, panicked recalculation of someone who has finally correctly assessed the situation. And after that, Michael said, "I'd strongly encourage you to think very carefully about every decision you've been making lately. Because the world is a lot smaller than you think it is. The people in it know each other better than you think they do." He said this last part, looking not at Brandon but at Darius, who was standing at the back of the small group, very still, looking at the ground with the expression of someone who has just heard something lock into place. Sirens came about 4 minutes later. What happened in those 4 minutes was this: Yes. The tall one said nothing and looked at nothing and seemed to be concentrating very hard on not existing. Brandon held himself together with visible effort, while working, his hands in his pockets, not meeting anyone's eye. And Darius Cole walked 3 steps to the right, separated himself from the other two in a way that was small and quiet, but absolutely deliberate, apart. He looked at Evelyn, she looked at him. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out roughly, like it had caught on something on the way out. "I didn't stop it. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry." Evelyn Whitmore looked at this 19-year-old boy for a long moment. Then she said something that nobody on that street expected. She said, "I could see that you wanted to." Something moved across Darius Cole's face that was too many things at once to be easily named. It wasn't relief. Relief was too simple. It was something more like the feeling of being seen in a way you had stopped expecting. He looked at the ground. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she said quietly, "You still can." When the police arrived, officers stepped out of 2 cruisers. There were witnesses everywhere, videos from 3 different angles. There were statements being given before the officers had finished introducing themselves. Stood with his mother off to the side, his hand on her shoulder, as she answered the officer's questions in her careful, precise way. She described what had happened. She described Brandon's actions. She described the necklace. She also described something else. "Officer," she said, "this is not the first time I've had an encounter like this in this neighborhood. I don't believe I'm the only one." The officer's pen slowed on his notepad. "What do you mean by that?" Evelyn reached into her canvas bag and withdrew a small notebook, the spiral-bound kind you could buy at any drugstore. In her small, steady handwriting, dates and descriptions going back 4 months. The officer looked at the notebook. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Michael. Michael looked at his mother. Because here was the thing about Evelyn Whitmore that nobody on that street, not Brandon Keller, not Marcus, the crowd that had gathered, honestly, not even Michael himself, though he should have known better, had understood until this moment. She had never been a victim. She had been a witness. For 31 years, she had watched everything. She had noticed patterns, the way someone notices the grammar of a language, not consciously, not dramatically, but inevitably, because you have spent enough time with the material that the structure becomes visible, whether you're looking for it or not. For the last 4 months, she had been watching something happen to Silver Creek that was too organized to be accidental. First thing she noticed was the man in the silver sedan. She had first seen him in June, parked outside Mrs. house on Oak Street, then outside the Hendersons' place 2 weeks later, outside the old Moretti property. She had noticed because he didn't get out of the car. Immediately he sat, as the kind of small behavior that most people didn't register, but that a librarian who had spent 31 years watching how children move through a space understood immediately as intentional positioning. Surveying, she had noted the license plate. She had noted the dates. Conversation started. She heard about it first from Mrs. At the Tuesday morning senior center group. A man had come to her door, very polite, had explained that the neighborhood was changing. She must have noticed. Explained that property values were volatile, had offered to take the house off her hands at a figure that was, Mrs. Patel said, about 40% below what her daughter had told her it was worth. All had said no. 3 weeks later, her mailbox was vandalized. And Evelyn heard from the Hendersons. Same story, different delivery. A man, very polite, an offer significantly below market value. A warning about the volatility of the market, the neighborhood changing. Hendersons had said no. 2 weeks later, someone broke the window on their garage. She had 6 cases in her notebook by the time Brandon Keller grabbed her necklace. Elderly homeowners, 6 below market offers, 6 subsequent incidents minor enough to be deniable, specific enough to be deliberate. She had been building the case for 2 months. She hadn't told Michael because she hadn't needed to yet. Now she needed to. She handed the notebook to the officer. who read 3 pages of it while standing on the corner of Maple and 4th, and whose face changed incrementally with each page, the way faces change when something that seemed like one thing gradually reveals itself to be something much larger. "There's Whitmore," he said finally. "This is where did you get all this?" "I was a librarian," she said. "How to find information." He looked at Michael, looked at his mother. He had a look on his face that she recognized. She had seen it on children in the library. The moment when they finished a book that had surprised them. When the story turned out to be bigger than the cover suggested. He said slowly. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since July," she said. "Years?" "And I didn't want to worry you until I had something worth saying." The officer was already on his radio. The street was still crowded. The 12 men who had ridden down Maple Street were standing at various points along the block, talking to witnesses, talking to residents who had stepped outside to see what was happening. Some of them pulling out their own phones and making their own calls. That was the thing about this particular group that Brandon Keller had also badly miscalculated. It wasn't just the size of them. It wasn't just the number of them. It was that they were from here. Many of them had grown up in Silver Creek or in towns just like it. They had mothers and grandmothers and neighbors who were exactly the kind of people who ended up on the receiving end of exactly this kind of operation. They knew these streets, they knew these people, and they had just found out that someone had been quietly running a pressure campaign against the elderly residents of a neighborhood where some of them still had family. The question of what happened next had already begun to answer itself. Brandon Keller was placed in the back of a police cruiser approximately 20 minutes after Michael Whitmore had arrived on the corner of Maple and 4th. Marcus was questioned and released, pending further review. Both of them had been photographed, had their information taken, had their versions of events measured against the 3 different phone videos that witnesses had submitted on the spot. Darius Cole was questioned separately. When the officer asked him what had happened, he told the truth, all of it, without being asked twice for any of it. The officer asked him if there was anything else he wanted to say. Just for a long moment. Then he said, "I think Brandon was working for someone. I don't know who, but there were things he said sometimes about the neighborhood, about old people who didn't know what their houses were worth. I didn't understand it at the time. I think I understand it now." The officer wrote that down very carefully. Harris looked at his hands. "Is there anything I can do?" he said. "Help. Is there anything? Talk to us," the officer said. "Tell us everything you remember. That's the most useful thing you can do right now." Darius nodded. For 40 minutes, Evelyn was sitting on the bench outside Hargrove's grocery. The owner had brought out a folding chair, and then, embarrassed by how inadequate that felt, had brought out a glass of water and a paper cup of coffee as well. When Michael came and sat beside her, he didn't say anything for a moment. She could feel him working through something. "Necklace," he said finally. "I'll wear it anyway," she said. Even with the break, Gerald would have said it gives it character. Michael almost smiled. "Almost. You should have told me," he said. She looked at him. The necklace, about the notebook, about what was happening. She was quiet for a moment. In the distance, the police radio was still going. The 12 men caught from the motorcycles was talking to an elderly woman who had come out of the house across the street, and the woman was gesturing at something, her front door, a mailbox, her property, with the particular gestures of someone who had been waiting to gesture at exactly these things for a long time. "You were worried about me," Evelyn said. "Of course I was worried about you. I know." She looked at her hands. A pendant closed in her palm, the broken chain hanging from between her fingers. "Worry is not the same as help, Michael. And I didn't need worry yet. I needed time." He looked at her. "I had a situation that needed documentation before it needed intervention. Intervention before documentation just scares off the people doing it. They changed their approach. You lose the thread." She paused. "It was a librarian. Research has an order." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Did you plan this today? Did you, Mom? Did you know something was going to happen?" She was quiet for just a beat too long. "And Rose Whitmore," he said. "I didn't plan for anyone to take Gerald's necklace," she said carefully. did not plan, but the rest of it. She looked out at the street at the 12 men who had come because her son had asked them to, who were now doing something she hadn't planned for, but that was turning out to be exactly right. Talking to people, they were listening. They were being the kind of presence on a street that made people feel like they could say the things they had been not quite saying for months. I needed people to see it, she said. I needed it to happen in public. I need witnesses and documentation and enough of a scene that the police would have to take it seriously. She paused. I had been waiting for the opportunity. I didn't know it was going to be today. When it happened, I knew what to do with it. Michael Whitmore sat next to his mother on the bench outside Hargrove's grocery in Silver Creek, Arizona on a Tuesday afternoon, and he was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "You have never needed anyone to save you. Out of you." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time since the pendant had been ripped from her neck, she smiled. "No," she said, "I just needed someone to show up." She reached over and put her hand on top of his. Always do. The coffee the Hargroves owner had brought out went cold before Evelyn drank half of it. She held the cup anyway. There was something grounding about having something warm in your hands when the world around you was moving fast. And it was moving fast now. Within an hour of the police cruisers arriving on Maple and 4th, 3 more units had been called in. The officer who had taken Evelyn's notebook, a broad-shouldered man named Detective Ray Calloway, had transferred to Silver Creek from Phoenix 8 years ago and had the particular exhaustion of someone who had seen too much of the city and come to the small town hoping for quiet, was now standing at the front of his car with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the clipped, careful way that meant whatever he was hearing was bigger than he had expected. Noticed he had spent 23 years learning to read the body language of men who were trying not to show what they were feeling. Calloway's left hand kept going to the back of his neck. He kept turning slightly away from the crowd, then catching himself and turning back. Eyes had the focused, recalibrating look of someone who had just picked up a thread and found that it went much farther than the room he was standing in. I walked over. "Detective." Calloway looked at him, at the phone in his hand, made a decision. "Mr. Moore," he said, "your mother's notebook, the license plate she documented in June. The sedan." He paused. "It came back to a property management company registered in Scottsdale. A colleague there who says that company connected to 2 similar investigations in the past 14 months. Same pattern." Michael went very still. "How similar?" he said. "Pressure campaign, below market offers, escalating harassment when the offers were declined, targeting elderly homeowners, predominantly on properties near planned development corridors." Calloway looked at him steadily. In previous cases, the company folded before charges could be brought. It's different name. Same ownership structure buried 3 layers deep. Michael looked back at his mother on the bench, talking to a woman from the neighborhood. Now, someone who had come over hesitantly. People approach a fire when they're not sure yet if it's going to warm them or burn them. The woman had her hands clasped in front of her and was talking. Evelyn was listening with the total unhurried attention that had been her professional signature for 31 years. "To her again," Michael said. "I know," Calloway said. "I also need to talk to you. Because if what I think is happening here is what's actually happening, it's not a matter of 2 or 3 young men intimidating an elderly woman. It's organized, it has money behind it, and the people running it are not going to be pleased that today happened the way it did." The word landed the way Calloway intended it to. Michael felt it in his back teeth. "You're telling me she might be a target," he said. "I'm telling you to take that possibility seriously." Michael turned back toward his mother. She had just made the woman next to her laugh at something, a real laugh, involuntary kind, the kind that happened before the person had decided to laugh. Even now, even today, she was still doing it. He took out his phone and typed a message to the group chain. It read, "Don't go anywhere. We need to talk." The meeting happened in the parking lot behind Hargrove's grocery because it was large enough to hold all of them and private enough that the crowd on the front street wouldn't see. 12 men stood in a rough circle. The afternoon had shifted. Light had that particular quality of late afternoon in Arizona, in October copper-colored, shadowed, the kind of light that made everything look either beautiful or ominous, depending on what you were already feeling. Earl stood in the center. "I'm going to tell you what Calloway told me," he said. "And then I want to hear what you found out from the people you talked to today." He talked for 4 minutes, but he interrupted. When he finished, a man named Garrett, 55 years old, Trevor says, had been riding with the chapter since before Michael joined, a face that looked like it had been through everything and had decided to find most of it interesting, said quietly, "It's a land grab. That's what it looks like. And they're using those kids as the harassment layer. Visible deniability. The kids take the fall. The company stays clean. And by the time anyone connects the property transactions to the pressure campaign, LLC has dissolved and reconstituted under a new name." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Not stupid," he said. "That's actually not stupid at all." "No," Michael agreed. "It isn't. A man named Tony, who was built like a piece of equipment and had the thoughtful eyes of someone you'd expect to find behind a library counter rather than a motorcycle." "There," said the woman on the corner, Mrs. Delgado. "She showed me a letter." He pulled out his phone, up a photograph. "She got it 3 weeks ago. Official-looking letterhead. Said her property had been identified for a voluntary acquisition program, and that given the trajectory of the neighborhood, they'd want to consider." He stopped. "She thought it was from the city." "It wasn't," Michael said. "No, but it had enough official-looking language that she called the city to check. The person she spoke to there said they didn't know anything about it, but that it wasn't necessarily anything to be concerned about. The development inquiries happened all the time." Tony looked up from the phone. Almost signed the paperwork. The offer was low. She's 73 years old and she lives alone. And the letter made it sound like the neighborhood was going to change anyway, and she might as well get something out of it now. In the circle said something low and sharp that wasn't quite a word. "Me," said a man named Doyle. "How many what? How many people on this block got one of those letters?" Tony looked at Michael. Michael looked at the parking lot. "That's what we need to find out," he said. They split into pairs. It was not an organized canvass in the official sense. They had no authority to conduct one. What they had was something simpler and in some ways more effective. They were people in a neighborhood who were asking other people in that same neighborhood if they were okay. That was it. That was the entire approach. The response was not subtle. For 90 minutes, they had spoken to 19 residents on and around Maple Street. Those 19, 11 had received correspondence from the company, some letters, some in-person visits, 2 what could only be described as warnings, delivered in person by men who were unfamiliar and polite in the specific way that politeness becomes a threat when the person being polite is between you and your front door. 5 of those 11 had received follow-up contact after declining the initial offer. 3 of them had experienced what they described as vandalism or harassment in the weeks following their refusals. Some had connected it to the offers. None of them had called the police because none of them had understood what they were looking at. All of them, every single one, had a story that fit. Garrett brought his notes back to Michael in the parking lot, over a page from a small notebook, the same kind Evelyn used. Earl noticed without saying anything and said, "Playbook. Letter first, then a visit, another visit, more pressure, then something happens to the property. Deanable. Then a final offer framed as them doing the homeowner a favor." He paused. 3 of the people I talked to said the final offer came within a week of the incident. "They're timing it," Michael said. Garrett confirmed. "The incidents are calculated, make the person feel vulnerable, and then off them and out. And the people doing the harassing, the Kellers of the world, they probably don't even know what they're part of. Getting paid to make people feel unsafe. They don't know why. Who's running it from the other end?" Michael thought about Brandon Keller in the back of that police cruiser. About Darius Cole talking to that officer for 40 minutes. About his mother's notebook. He thought about the silver sedan. "Is coordinating this from Scottsdale," he said. "Them with enough money to set up shell LLCs and enough patience to run a months-long campaign." Someone who has done this before, in 2 other towns, walked away clean both times. Garrett looked at him. What do we do? Michael looked at the notes in his hand, looked at the parking lot around him, at the 12 men who had ridden down Maple Street because a text message had said, Mom. Maple and Fourth. Now, at the people who had come out of their houses and handed over letters and photographs and described incidents they hadn't reported because they hadn't known who to report them to. We do what my mother was doing, he said. We build the case. Evelyn was still on the bench when Michael came back around the front of the store. She had her notebook open on her knee, a new page, and was writing something in her careful, unhurried hand. The woman she had been talking to earlier was still there, and so was another woman who had joined them at some point. An older man Michael recognized vaguely as someone who walked his terrier past the house every morning. Cliff stood there for a moment without announcing himself, watching her. She was doing what she had always done. She was taking the scattered, frightened pieces of what people were trying to tell her and organizing them into something coherent. She was giving shape to things that had felt shapeless. She was turning individual experiences into a pattern that could be named and therefore dealt with. 31 years of helping children find the right book for what they were going through. He finally understood why she had been so good at it. It wasn't just that she read a lot. It was that she understood that the same story could be told 1,000 different ways, and the version that mattered was the one that made the person holding it feel less alone. She looked up. Detective Calloway wants to talk to you again. She nodded, already closing the notebook. I thought he might. He also wants to know if you'd be willing to work with his contact in Scottsdale. Formally, give a statement that can be used to connect what's happening here to the other 2 towns. She stood up, pulled her canvas bag, looked at him. Of course, she said. It might mean your name is on record. Officially. Connected to this. Michael. She looked at him steadily. I'm 78 years old. I was a librarian. I documented everything. I have nothing to be afraid of. He believed her. That was the strange part. He absolutely believed her. Something else, he said. She waited. Calloway said that the people behind this might be aware that today happened. He said we should take seriously the possibility that they'll try to discourage me, she said. The word I would have used. It's the accurate word. She tilted her head. To suggest that I go stay somewhere else for a while. I'm going to strongly suggest it. And if I don't want to, then I'm going to strongly suggest that you let me stay with you. She looked at him for a long moment. You have your own place, Michael. I have a place, he said. That's different. Something in her expression shifted something small in the region around her eyes that was either the beginning of tears or the end of a very long argument she had been having with herself for 4 years about the exact nature of her own independence. I'll think about it, she said. That's not, I said I'll think about it. Rail, she put her hand on his arm briefly now. Go talk to your detective. Calloway had set up a temporary workspace in the small office that Hargrove let him use, a room barely big enough for a desk, and 3 chairs that had probably been bought at different times from different places and had never agreed with each other. He spread Evelyn's notebook open on the desk along with the notes Michael had brought from the parking lot meeting and studied them with the methodical attention of someone doing something important and not wanting to miss the step that would make it all fall apart. Evelyn sat across from him. Michael stood by the door. Always. Mrs. Whitmore, Calloway said, I want to walk through your timeline from the beginning. Every entry, every date, every observation. He looked up at her. It'll take a while. This detective, she said. I once cataloged 14,000 books by hand when the computer system went down during an audit. I have time. Calloway almost smiled. He started at the beginning. They went through it entry by entry, the silver sedan, the dates, the license plate, the 6 homeowners she had documented before today. She answered every question precisely and completely, and when Calloway pushed back on an observation, she explained her reasoning in the same quiet, authoritative way she had explained the Dewey Decimal System to confused parents for 3 decades. At the end of 15 minutes, Calloway had stopped pushing back. He was halfway through the notebook when he stopped. August 14th, he said. Yes. You describe a conversation between two men outside the Henderson property. You say you could hear parts of it from across the street. He looked at the page. You write, one of them said, oh, we need the last three before the city meeting in November. Timeline doesn't move. He looked up from the notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, you heard that? I wrote it down immediately, she said. My phone first, so I had the timestamp. Then in the notebook when I got home. Calloway set the notebook down. He looked at Michael. Michael had straightened up from the doorframe. The city meeting in November, Calloway said slowly. Planning commission, Michael said. They have a meeting scheduled. I remember seeing something about it. Something about a development corridor. A development corridor, Calloway repeated. He looked at the wall, which had nothing on it, but he was looking at it the way people look at things when they're seeing something else entirely. If you knew ahead of the Planning Commission vote that a particular development corridor was going to be approved, if you had inside information, previous 6 months, quietly acquiring properties along that corridor at below market rates, he stopped. He didn't need to finish. The room was very quiet. How much would you make? Michael said. Depends on the corridor. Always on the development. Calloway looked at the notebook. Tens of millions. Peter said, if you acquired enough properties. And the last three, Michael said. Last three properties in the corridor that they don't own yet, Calloway said. Whose owners wouldn't sell. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. I live on Oak Street, she said quietly. Off Maple. Gerald and I bought our house in 9,987. Is Oak Street? Michael started. Don't know yet, Calloway said. He was already on his phone. I'm going to find out in approximately. He waited, reading something on the screen. Oh, he said. Something about the way he said it closed all the air in the room. That, Michael said. Calloway turned the phone screen to face him. It was a map, a planning commission document publicly available, loaded from the city's website. There was a shaded corridor running through the southern part of Silver Creek. Properties along the corridor were highlighted. One of the highlighted streets was Oak. Oh, looked at the map. He looked at Calloway. He looked at his mother. Evelyn Whitmore looked at the map with the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they were already 90% sure of. They're never going to stop with the three young men, she said, almost to herself. The harassment was just to soften us up, give us out, or scare us enough that we'd take whatever they offered. She paused. On their list. You were on their list, Calloway confirmed. She stopped. Today you became visible, Michael said. Which means they know they can't do this quietly anymore. The silence stretched. Evelyn said calmly, well, then we should move quickly. She didn't stay on Oak Street that night. She was afraid, and she would clarify this distinction to anyone who asked. Her son, which she did twice on the drive over, but because moving quickly was its own kind of strategy. And being predictable was not a luxury she could afford at this particular moment. That's Mrs. Patel's house on Birchwood, which was far enough from the corridor to be off the primary radar and close enough to the center of things to be useful. Mrs. Patel, who was 71 and had declined 2 offers from the company and had her mailbox destroyed in July, ferociously glad to have her. Made extra food, Mrs. Patel said, which in her particular dialect of hospitality meant, hoping you'd come. I've been alone with this for too long. I am deeply relieved to not be alone with it anymore. Evelyn sat at Mrs. Patel's kitchen table with her notebook and a cup of tea that was very sweet and very strong in the way that Mrs. made everything, and she opened to a new page. Michael had not wanted to leave. She had told him to go. Work to do, she had said. And so do I. Either of us can do it right if you're sitting next to me watching me breathe. Mom, Michael Edward Whitmore. I have been conducting research on a coordinated real estate fraud scheme for 4 months without anyone's help. I am capable of writing notes in someone else's kitchen. He had left, but he had sent 2 of the 12 to park outside Mrs. Paul's house in rotating shifts, which Evelyn had pretended not to notice, and which Mrs. had noticed immediately and described as wonderful and also slightly dramatic. Very dramatic, Evelyn agreed. He gets that from his father. Mrs. Patel laughed. It occurred to Evelyn that she hadn't heard that laugh before the real one, unguarded one in all the years she had known Priya Patel from the Tuesday group and from the neighborhood. Had heard the polite laugh, the social laugh, not this one, about how much fear could mute a person, about the woman at the corner who had been about to get into her car and had instead leaned against a dent and watched, about the dry cleaner owner who had come out to his doorstep, about the people who had given their statements, shaking slightly, some of them with the apologetic posture of people who were ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. Fear, she had learned, was not the absence of courage. It was the thing courage moved through. She opened her notebook to the new page and wrote the date at the top. But then she wrote, underneath it, what do they still need? How much time do we have to stop it? Michael's phone rang at 11:47 that night. Her house, a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of Silver Creek that served as gathering space, an informal headquarters sitting at the long table with Garrett and Tony and Doyle. I knew the notes from the afternoon with the kind of focused, unhurried attention that men who have learned to plan in difficult circumstances bring to the act of planning. Look at the screen. Unknown number, Arizona area code. As he answered it, Mr. Whitmore. The voice was male, her age, carefully pleasant in the way of people who have spent time learning to sound reasonable, regardless of what they're saying. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I believe we may have had a misunderstanding today. I'd like the opportunity to clear it up. Michael said nothing. There's the young men who encountered your mother that was unfortunate. They exceeded their instructions significantly, and I want you to understand that is not how I operate. I want you to understand that as clearly as possible. Still nothing from Michael. Just continued. Your mother is an impressive woman, clearly, and I understand why what happened today was upsetting. I'd ask you to consider that the larger situation here is somewhat more nuanced than it appeared this afternoon. There are significant economic interests at stake. There are development plans that will benefit this community. Are you recording this call? Michael said. Brief pause. Excuse me? I want to know if you're recording this conversation. I know. No, I'm not. This is an informal. I am, Michael said. I've been recording since I answered. So I want you to be very careful about the next thing you say to me. The carefully pleasant voice disappeared. That was something quieter and more honest. What do you want? The man said. I want you to listen, Michael said, very carefully. You called me to offer something. I wrote, an invitation to stay out of it, maybe a veiled suggestion that things could get unpleasant if I don't. He paused. I'm going to save you the speech. We have your letters. They have witness statements. We have a timeline going back 4 months. We have a detective in Silver Creek working with contacts in Scottsdale and in 2 other towns where you've run this same operation. I have a recording of this phone call, which now includes you acknowledging that the young men today were operating under your instructions, even if they exceeded them. He let that sit for a second. What I want from you is very simple. I want you to think carefully about the next 12 hours. I want you to consider the possibility that the most advantageous position for you right now is to get very quiet. Silence on the other end. You don't know what you're getting into. No, Michael agreed. I know who I'm doing it for. He ended the call. Garrett was looking at him from across the table. Was that? Yes, Michael said. Did you actually record it? Michael picked up his phone and showed Garrett the recording app, already saved. Garrett made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that had too much weight to be a laugh. Mother, he said, is the most dangerous person I've ever met. I know, Michael said. And this. Not all of it. Enough of it. Michael looked at the recording on his phone. He looked at the notes on the table. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, because he needed somewhere to look that wasn't at any of the things he was feeling. Public scene, he said. She needed the witnesses. There were the videos, the police report. She needed it all to be on record and undeniable. She had the notebook. She had the pattern. But without a public incident that forced the police to take it seriously, an elderly woman's private observations. With today, he set the phone down. But today, she has a case. She used today, Garrett said. Plugs. She used every piece of it, including us. Are you angry? Michael thought about it. About his mother on the bench with the cold coffee and the compass rose in her hand. About 31 years of children finding their stories. About a man in his mid-50s calling himself a mystery and thinking he was in control of a cosmos that had already been over before it started. Oh, he said. Good, Garrett said. Because I think we've got a lot of work to do. Yeah, said Michael. Look at the notes. We do. He pulled the recording app back up on his phone. The file. Made sure it was saved in 3 places. Oh, waiting. Then he opened a new message to Calloway. You need to hear something. Can we meet first thing tomorrow? The reply came back in under a minute. Already awake. Name the place. Michael looked around the table at the men who had stayed, who were still here at midnight because a text message had said Mom and they had come. Now they were still here because the thing they had come for had turned out to be bigger than any of them expected. At Garrett, he looked at Tony. He looked at Doyle, who had his own notebook out and was writing in it with the same careful, unhurried hand. And Michael Whitmore understood. In the way you understand things that you already knew but hadn't fully faced yet, there was going to be the day that everything either fell into place or fell apart. Everywhere else. And that his mother had made sure months before any of them were paying attention that they were as ready as they could be. Calloway didn't sleep. I found that out at 5:47 in the morning when he pulled into the parking lot of the Silver Creek Diner and saw the detective's car already there, already running, already with a paper coffee cup on the roof that had clearly been there long enough to stop steaming. Calloway was standing outside the car, talking on his phone, and he had the look of a man who had been awake for so long that sleep had become an abstract concept he was no longer personally invested in. I got out of his truck. Calloway held up one finger, give me a minute, and kept talking. Paul leaned against his own hood and waited. The morning was cold the way Arizona mornings in October could be cold sharply. An apology, the kind of cold that made you remember. That desert was a climate, or not a temperature, and that it had its own version of everything. He could see his breath. He thought about his mother at Mrs. Hull's house and told himself she was fine. She was fine. She had survived 60 years of things harder than this. She survived Gerald's death and budget cuts and 31 years of middle schoolers, and she was fine. Calloway ended his call. Scottsdale confirmed it. He said, Michael had spoken a single word. The company Meridian Property Solutions, we'll see, currently, though it's been 4 other names in the last 6 years, is tied to a developer named Harlan Voss. Not directly. There are 2 holding companies between Voss and Meridian. Financial trail is there. If you know where to look, my colleague in Scottsdale has been looking for 14 months. He picked the coffee cup off the roof of his car and drank from it without checking if it was still warm. Voss is not small. He's got commercial projects in 3 states, relationships with 2 city planning commissioners in the Phoenix metro area. He's done this before, and he's done it clean. Because by the time anyone figures out the full picture, LLC has dissolved, the properties have been sold, and he's 3 projects down the road. Michael said, I recorded a phone call last night. Calloway stopped drinking, pulled out his phone, and played it. The parking lot was quiet enough that the voice from the recording was perfectly audible, carefully pleasant tone, the acknowledgement of the young men and their instructions. The shift when Michael had said he was recording, the silence at the end that said more than the words had. That finished, Calloway set his coffee cup on the roof of his car again. You were recording, he said. I did. So he knew. He knew. And he kept talking. He did. Calloway looked at the phone. He looked at Michael. He had the expression of a man who had spent 8 years in Silver Creek for something to actually matter and was now recalibrating the entire morning around the fact that it did. Well, he's scared, Calloway said.
Yes, scared men make mistakes. I know, I need that recording.
I brought 3 copies, Michael said. Flash drive, emailed to myself from 2 different addresses, saved to a cloud account Garrett set up last night that nobody has the password to except me and him. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small flash drive. "Listeners, this is for you." Calloway took it with both hands, which was not something Michael had ever seen him do with anything. "There's no book, and this recording," Calloway said quietly, "combined with what Scottsdale already has, this is enough to get a warrant. Not a definitive case yet, but enough to start pulling on threads officially. Arenas, financial records, communication logs." He looked up. "Us is going to know it's coming. He probably already does. Well, the next 24 hours are going to be the most important ones." "What do you need from us?" Michael said. Calloway considered that for a moment. "Keep talking to people," he said. "Every resident who received a letter, every person who had an incident, I need formal statements. Dated, as many as you can get today." He paused. "Oh, and I need your mother to be somewhere safe and accessible. I think to need her for the formal statement process, I need to know she's not reachable by anyone who isn't us. She's at Mrs. Hall's." "Good." He picked up his coffee again. "There?" Michael almost laughed. "Detective," he said. "Do my best." Calloway understood immediately. "Right," he said. "Your mother." "My mother," Michael confirmed. Evan had been awake since 4. Hall's guest room had a window that faced east, which meant the morning came in early and without softening. Evan had lain in the unfamiliar bed for 20 minutes before acknowledging to herself that sleep was finished with her for the night. She made tea in Mrs. Patel's kitchen without turning on the overhead light. She stood at the counter in the quiet gray pre-dawn and she thought about Gerald. She did this, sometimes thought about him in the spaces between things, when the day hadn't fully started and her mind was still soft enough to let him in without the effort it sometimes took in busier hours. About the way he used to stand at their kitchen window in the mornings, looking at the yard with the particular expression of a man who found it genuinely interesting what a night of sleep could do to a garden. About his hands around a coffee cup. She thought about the sound of him moving through the house, the particular rhythm of him, the weight of his footsteps, the small sounds of his presence that she had not fully cataloged while he was alive, and that she was still, years later, finding new instances of in her memory. About what he would make of today. She knew what he would make of it. She knew exactly. He would have that look, the one he got when she did something that he had suspected her capable of, but hadn't seen before. Pride and exasperation and delight in roughly equal measure, delight winning in the end, because it always did with Gerald, because that was who he was, because he had moved through 50 years of their life together, finding things to be delighted by, because she had loved him for it more than she had ever adequately told him. Colorado, she touched the pendant through the fabric of her shirt. Michael had taken it last night to get the chain repaired. He said first thing in the morning, there was a jeweler on Chandler Street who owed him a favor. She had let him take it because she understood that needing to do something concrete for her was how he moved through worry, as the pendant was safe with him. More than safe. But she felt its absence. She felt it the way she felt Gerald's absence, not as a wound anymore, but as a shape in the space where something warm used to be. She opened her notebook. She had 3 things she needed to do before Michael came back. First was a list of every address she had documented in the past 4 months, cross-referenced with the corridor map she had downloaded from the City Planning Commission website in September, when she'd first started to understand what she was looking at. She had done this in her notebook already, but she wanted it typed, organized in a way that a detective or a prosecutor could hand to someone else and have that person understand it in under 5 minutes. Paul had a laptop on the kitchen table. Evelyn sat down, opened it, and started typing. The second thing she needed was a conversation she had been putting off. And the third thing she needed was something she hadn't told Michael or anyone else. Something she had found in October, 3 weeks ago, that she had been sitting with while she figured out what exactly it meant and who exactly needed to know it. There she started with the typing. The other 2 things would wait until the morning was properly started and she had more tea. Mrs. Patel came downstairs at 6:30 and found Evelyn at her kitchen table with the laptop, a cup of tea, and 4 pages of handwritten additions to the document she was building. "Well, you didn't sleep," Mrs. Patel said. "I slept some." "How much is some?" "Enough to be functional." Evelyn looked up. "Sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't disturb me." Mrs. sat down across from her and folded her hands on the table in the way she had precisely posed, the posture of someone who had learned to present stillness to the world because the world had not always been kind to her visible feelings. "What are you building?" Evelyn turned the laptop so she could see. Miss Patel read for a moment. Her expression changed slowly, in the way expressions changed when you were reading something you had lived through and seeing it set down plainly for the first time. When you saw your own experience reflected back at you in organized, documented language and felt the particular complicated thing of being both validated and freshly angry. "Everything," Mrs. Patel said. "That's all of us." "All of you," Evelyn said. "Everyone who got a letter. Everyone who had an incident afterward. Every date I have, every detail." Mrs. Patel was quiet. "I've known about most of this for months," she said finally. I've been sitting in the Tuesday group listening to people describe pieces of it." She stopped. "I thought it was just the neighborhood. Times. I thought it was." She looked at Evelyn. "I didn't understand it was organized. Most people don't. The design, it's supposed to look random. But you saw it. I had time and a notebook and 31 years of learning to notice when something is a pattern rather than a coincidence." Evelyn picked up her tea. Then I had Gerald, who spent 40 years as an accountant and always said the same thing: follow the money. There. If you can't explain why something keeps happening, without who benefits. Mrs. Patel looked at the screen again. "Pulse," she said quietly. "My mailbox." Her voice did something. On something. She cleared it. "I thought I was just unlucky. It was just vandals. It wasn't." "No," she straightened. Something resolved in her face. The way things resolved when a grief stops being shapeless and becomes something with edges, something that can be picked up and carried because it finally has a form. "Oh, it wasn't." She looked at Evelyn. "What do you need me to do?" "I need your formal statement. Your letter from the company. Every date you remember. And I need you to call Mrs. Henderson and tell her to do the same." Mrs. nodded. She was already reaching for her phone. Knock at the door came at 8:15. I called out him. Michael. It was not Calloway. Was not one of the 12 men in rotating shifts outside. Patel opened the door. Evelyn had told her to check who it was first, which she had through the side window, and found a young man standing on the step in a jacket that was too thin for the morning cold, in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched with the posture of someone who is not sure they're going to be let in and has come anyway. Elias Cole. He looked at Mrs. Patel. He looked past her at Evelyn, who had stood up from the kitchen table and was watching him from the hallway. "I'm sorry to come here," he said. "I got the address from the officer, gave it to me. He said it would be okay if he stopped. I can leave." He said me to leave. "I'll leave." Evelyn looked at him for a moment. 18 years old, a jacket too thin for the cold. The expression of someone standing at the exact edge of a decision. "Man," she said. Mrs. Patel stepped back. Darius came inside. "Here." He stood in the hallway and didn't quite know what to do with his hands. "Here." "Sit down," Evelyn said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "Here's." He sat. She sat across from him. Mrs. Patel made noise in the background that resolved itself into the sound of the kettle being filled. Darius looked at the table. He looked at the laptop document on the screen. He looked at Evelyn's notebook. "To the police for a long time, yesterday," he said. "Heard? I told them everything I knew." He looked up. "Others, which isn't, I want to be honest with you, it's not as much as I thought it was. I knew Brandon was getting paid. I knew it was something about the neighborhood, property. He didn't give me the details. I think he thought I wouldn't understand." Something flickered in his eyes. "I'd say no. Would you have?" Evelyn said. "Quiet for a moment." "I want to say yes," he said. "I want to say that if I'd known what it actually was, I would have said no immediately. I'm trying to be honest, and I don't know for certain. 8 months ago, I wasn't making good choices. I was making the choices that were in front of me, and I didn't stop to think about what they were part of." He paused. I'm trying to be honest because I think being honest is the only thing that's actually useful right now. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Yep. Mrs. Patel set a cup of tea in front of him. He looked at it like he hadn't expected kindness and wasn't sure what to do with it. Sorry, Evelyn said. Being honest is the useful thing. She folded her hands on the table. What else do you know about Brandon, about who was paying him? Darius wrapped both hands around the teacup. There was a man. Brandon never said his name, but he called him the coordinator. I heard Brandon on the phone with him twice. Brandon called him from the car. Didn't know I was awake in the back seat. He paused. First time I heard it, the coordinator was giving him addresses. Addresses, specific people. He knew their names. He knew their schedules. He looked at Evelyn. He knew when your house was empty. The room was very quiet. He knew your routine, Darius said. He knew you went to Hargrove's on Tuesdays at 2. Old Brandon, he said, the Whitmore woman is going to be the hard one. She's been watching. We need her unsettled before we can make the move. Evelyn absorbed this without moving. Are targeting me specifically, she said. It was not a question. Darius stopped, looked at his tea. Brandon was supposed to scare you, make you feel vulnerable, alone. The coordinator said if you felt safe and in control, you'd never take an offer. Sure. But if something happened to you on the street, if you felt like the neighborhood wasn't safe, I'd be more likely to sell, Evelyn said. Yes, she thought about that. She thought about standing on that corner and the necklace being ripped from her neck and Brandon's voice saying, nobody's coming for you. About how precisely calibrated that particular cruelty had been, not random, impulsive, but calculated to find the exact center of an old woman's fear, her aloneness, her vulnerability, her sense of being seen and dismissed. But except he had miscalculated one thing. She was not afraid of being alone. She was afraid of being unseen. And the moment he had done it in public, in a busy corner, on a Tuesday afternoon, the moment he had made it visible, he had made the single error that all of her waiting had been designed to provoke. Darius, she said, and something in her voice made him look up from the teacup. Coordinator's number. The one Brandon called from. Nurse, did you ever see it? He shook his head. Then he stopped. He said. Brandon's car, he kept his old phones in the center console. But he had 3 phones. He used different ones for different things. It made him hard to trace. He paused. He didn't always remember which one he'd used for which call. Where's the car? Evelyn said. Don't. When they took him in, Darius looked at her. Officer Calloway, if he gets a warrant for the phone, he needs probable cause, Evelyn said. He has the recording, doesn't he? From Michael's call? Evelyn looked at him. Darius had sharp eyes. She had noticed that from the beginning, up the corner, even when he'd been standing in the back of the group, trying not to be seen, but he'd been watching with the eyes of someone taking in more than they let on. Intelligent eyes in a face that hadn't been given enough reason to use them well. What did you know about the recording? She said. I didn't, he said. I ought for certain, but the way the officer talked to me this morning, there was something. He was very calm, calmer than yesterday, like something had shifted overnight. He shrugged slightly. When the police are calm, it usually means something changed in their favor. Evelyn studied him. What I expected, she said. I know, he said quietly. Not what I expected either. Mrs. Patel refilled his tea without being asked. Calloway got the warrant at 10:23 in the morning. Found out about it in a text from Calloway that said simply, it approved. Moving on the vehicle now. Stand by. He was on Birchwood Street, parked outside Mrs. Patel's house when the message came in. He forwarded it to Garrett, who was on the other side of town, finishing up with the third family who had agreed to give a formal statement. In 30, they had 7 signed statements. By 11, they had 9. Calls were happening faster now because people were talking to each other. That was the thing about Silver Creek, that the people running this operation had perhaps underestimated it was a small town. Small towns on conversation. Once the first 2 families had given their statements and word had gotten through the neighborhood that someone was actually doing, some phone calls had started and people were calling each other and the pitted seemed fragment random for months, was pulling itself into focus in real time across kittens, tables, and front porches all over the southern end of town. Earl called Michael at 11:15. "You need to hear this," he said. "The Kowalski place on Oak. He's got something." "What kind of something?" "The kind you come and see." Michael drove to Oak Street. Henry Kowalski was 81 years old, a retired postal worker who walked his terrier every morning at 7 and had lived on Oak Street for 43 years. He had the squinting, careful look of a man who had spent 4 decades paying attention to which houses got mail and which ones didn't, which was to say the look of a man who noticed things in his neighborhood the way other people notice things inside their own houses automatically, completely, without needing a reason. He was sitting in his living room when Michael arrived, on the coffee table that had clearly been brought down from somewhere and had the dusty top of something that hadn't been touched in a while. "Oh," Kowalski said, without preamble. Michael sat. Kowalski opened the box. Inside were 3 things. A video camera, the old kind, handheld, bought maybe 15 years ago, 2 memory cards in a Ziploc bag, a composition notebook that made Michael think involuntarily of his mother, the silver sedan too, Kowalski said. "First time in May." "I didn't know what it was. I just knew it didn't belong. Only 3 years on this street. I know every car that belongs." He tapped the camera. "I started filming it in June." Michael stared at the camera. "Found it," he said. "Every time I saw it, I've got 7 videos. License plates, dates, times, out of the car, and when." He looked at Michael steadily. "That footage of a man going to 4 different front doors on this block between June and September. Clear footage. Face level. My neighbor across the street has a camera over his garage. I talked to him this morning. Footage too, from a different angle." He paused. "Oh, we're old, not oblivious." Michael looked at the box on the coffee table and felt something happen in his chest that was difficult to name, something between relief and something rawer than relief. Something closer to the feeling of finding out that the ground you were standing on was more solid than you thought. "Kowalski," he said, "I need you to talk to Detective Calloway right now." "Hey." "This morning." "I know," Kowalski said. "I've been waiting for someone to come ask." He looked at Michael with 73 years of paying attention behind his eyes. I was starting to think nobody was going to. "I'm sorry it took this long." "You're here now," Kowalski said simply. He reached into the box and handed Michael the Ziploc bag with the memory cards. "Even videos. Your detective needs to handle these properly. Of evidence, whatever they call it. I need a receipt." "You'll get one," Michael said. He already had his phone out. "I'm calling him right now." Calloway's voice, when he heard about the videos, was the voice of a man who had been pushing a boulder up a hill and just felt it crest. "7 videos," he said. 7. Plus whatever his neighbor has. "I need to be there in the next 20 minutes, I'll tell him." Michael hung up and looked at Kowalski, just sitting with his terrier in his lap, scratching behind its ears with the unhurried patience of a man who had decided that the morning was going exactly as it should. "In his way," Michael said. Kowalski nodded. Then he said, "Evelyn." Michael paused. "You know her?" "Of course I know her. Walk past her house every morning. She waves from the yard. He used to talk about his garden, good man. And I've seen her watching things this summer." Here's her noticing. He tilted his head. "Smart, better than she lets on. Smarter than any of us gave her credit for," Michael said. Kowalski made a sound that was quiet and knowing. "Women of her generation often are. They didn't get the luxury of letting it show too much." He scratched the dog's ear. "Colorados, the world spent a long time not paying attention to them. Some of them used that. Some of them, they just got very good at watching." Michael thought about his mother at 4 in the morning at Mrs. Patel's kitchen table, building a document in the quiet before anyone else was awake. About 4 months of spiral notebooks and license plates and dates. About a woman who had understood before anyone else was looking what was wrong in her neighborhood and who had decided alone, quietly, without asking for help, to build the case that would make it undeniable. He said. They did. The warrant for Brandon's vehicle came through at 11:40. Calloway's team found 2 phones in the center console, exactly where Darius had said. Both were bagged and tagged. That was ultimately flagged as relevant a burner, with a call log that had been partially deleted but not carefully enough, showed 11 calls to a number that traced back through 2 layers of forwarding to a communication account registered to Meridian Property Solutions. Holloway called Michael with the update at 12:15. But the connection, he said. It's not airtight yet. The forwarding layers will take time to fully trace, but it's the thread. It's the thread that connects the street-level harassment to the company. Behind with the recording, the statements, the footage from Kowalski. He paused. And with your mother's notebook, which, I want to say for the record, a comprehensive piece of private citizen documentation I have seen in 22 years of law enforcement. Michael was parked outside Mrs. Bell's house. Can you tell her that yourself? A brief pause. Holloway said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Come by this afternoon. I want the update anyway. I'll be there at 2. Michael ended the call and sat in his truck for a moment. What about the phone call last night? The carefully pleasant voice that had said, I believe we may have had a misunderstanding. About the pause before the voice had stopped being careful. The shift in it when it understood that the conversation was not what it had expected. About Harlan Voss, a name he hadn't known 24 hours ago, and that now felt like something central, something load-bearing, something that a whole constructed reality had been built around. And that was now, incrementally, under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. About a woman who had spent 4 months quietly, without drama or announcement, building exactly the kind of case that was now causing that pressure. Out of the truck and knocked on Mrs. Patel's door. Evelyn answered. She was dressed, posed, notebook in hand, of someone who had been waiting for him to arrive and had used the time productively. Oh, she said. He told her about the phones, about the call log, Kowalski's videos. She listened without interrupting, which was something she did when she was processing something significant. Her face did very little. Her eyes did everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Harry Kowalski has been filming that car since June? 7 videos. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh, but contained one. Wondered, she said. I saw him out there with his camera 3 times and thought he was filming birds. She shook her head. I should have just asked. Mom, I should have asked. I was so focused on doing it quietly, doing it without... She paused. Was so focused on not alarming people that I didn't think about the fact that some people were already alarmed and already doing something about it. She looked at him. I wasn't the only one watching. No, he said. You weren't. Something moved through her face that he didn't see often. Something that was close to what happened when a feeling was too large to be held entirely inside and a very small part of it leaked out around the edges before she could catch it. She looked down at the notebook in her hand. Gerald would have found Henry Kowalski 3 months ago, she said quietly. Always better at asking. You found him, Michael said. It just took the right moment. She looked at him. Then she nodded, once the kind of nod that closed something. Holloway is coming at 2, Michael said. Good. She straightened. Bars. I need to make sure the document is finished before then. And there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been sitting with that I think Calloway needs to hear. Something in her voice made him still. Have something. She looked at him with the calm of someone who has been carrying a weight for long enough that they've made peace with the carrying of it, is now finally ready to set it down. In October, she said, 3 weeks ago, I went to the city planning office, publicly available records. Anyone can request them. She paused. I found something in the correspondence. Logs. An email thread between a planning commission consultant and an address that I recognized from one of the letters the homeowners had received. She held his gaze. And on the inside of the planning commission has been feeding information to Meridian. Specific information about the corridor, the timeline. Properties were essential. They knew exactly which houses to target because someone told them. The morning was completely quiet around them. The full weight of what she was saying land. He said, How long have you been sitting on this? 3 weeks, she said. Sir? I needed to be certain, she said. I needed documentation I could hand to someone and have them not be able to dismiss. A retired librarian pointing at an email thread is not evidence. A retired librarian with a 4-month documented timeline, and video recordings, 9 signed witness statements, a phone call, a connected phone log, and then an email thread that is a different conversation. He stared at her. You're back. You built the whole thing, he said. All the foundation, she said. All of you. Built the rest of it. He didn't have words for a moment. At his mother standing in Mrs. Patel's doorway in the October morning cold, with her notebook in her hand and the absent weight of Gerald's pendant against her collarbone. And he felt something so complicated and large and specific that he understood suddenly why she had always loved books, because some things were too big to be carried alone and you needed the right container for them. Chloe needs to know, he said. Yes, she said. Goes beyond Silver Creek. Yes, she said. Does. She stepped back from the door. Come inside, she said. I'll make tea and tell you the rest of it. The tea, Mrs. Homemade was the same as the night before, too sweet, too strong, exactly right. Evelyn sat across from Michael at the kitchen table with her notebook open and the document on the laptop turned so he could see the screen, and she told him everything she had been holding for 3 weeks, with the records request. The Planning Commission posts their correspondence logs online, she said. Public record. It's a transparency measure the city adopted 6 years ago. Most people don't know it exists because most people don't go looking for it. Not hidden. It's just not advertised. She turned 2 pages in the notebook. After I found the corridor map, I started reading through the logs. I was looking for anything that connected the development timeline to an outside party. I wasn't expecting to find it so clearly. Michael was looking at the laptop screen. 3rd page, she said. He scrolled. The email thread was exactly what she'd described, a correspondence between someone identified in the logs as a planning commission consultant named Alderman, first initial R, and an address that Evelyn had highlighted in yellow. Acquisitions Provolink Net. The first email was dated July 8th, in the clipped, transactional language of someone who had learned to say things without quite saying them. Timeline confirmed for November session. Corridor boundaries finalized. Eastern properties remain priority. 3 outstanding. Advise. Michael read it twice. He told them the corridor was confirmed in July, he said. This before the Planning Commission voted to put it on the November agenda, Evelyn said. To add it to the agenda was September 14th. This R. Alderman, told Meridian it was confirmed in July. Routers, which means either he had advanced knowledge of the vote or he influenced it, or both. Michael sat back. This is not just fraud, he said. Sir. This is corruption inside the Planning Commission. Yeah. Yes, Mom. He looked at her. This is if this goes where it looks like it goes. This is not a local case anymore. This is not Detective Calloway and a warrant for a car. This is federal. I know, she said. You've been pissing on this for 3 weeks. I needed the rest of the case to be solid first, she said, with the patience of someone explaining something that should not need to be explained, but is being explained anyway, kindly because the person she's explaining it to is her son and she loves him. Brought this to Calloway 3 weeks ago with nothing else, just an email thread and a corridor map. What does he have? An email thread that a good lawyer says proves nothing. An old woman who found it while poking around public records. A case. That's a theory. And now it's the keystone, she said. It sits on top of the phone logs and the recordings and the statements and the videos and the notebook, and it explains all of it. It answers the questions that all the other evidence raises. How did they know exactly which properties to target? How did they know the corridor boundaries before anyone else? How did they know the timeline well enough to run a 6-month operation? She tapped the screen. This is the person who told them. And now we can prove that everything below it was built on that information. The kitchen was very quiet. Mrs. Patel, who had been standing near the counter with her tea, so someone in the city government was helping them steal our homes. Evelyn looked at her. Yes, she said. That's exactly what was happening. Something shifted in Mrs. Hall's face. Not surprised, she was past surprise. Rather than the caught, it was something harder than surprise. The particular anger of someone who has discovered that the institution that was supposed to protect them was instead the instrument being used against them. Her cup down carefully, deliberately. "What do we do?" she said. It was not a question. "We give Calloway everything," Evelyn said. "All of it. Today. This afternoon. And then we let the process do what it's supposed to do. And if the process doesn't, it will," Michael said. If women looked at him, "It will," he said again. And said it with the particular steadiness of someone who has chosen, deliberately, to believe in something because the alternative is not useful. Because we're not going to let it not. Calloway arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. Told Michael something about him. People who arrived exactly on time were people who had been ready early and made themselves wait because they understood that arriving early looked eager and arriving late looked careless, and that in this particular situation, those impressions were ones he could afford. He sat at Mrs. Patel's kitchen table with Evelyn's full document in front of him, printed now, 2 pages, organized chronologically with a 1-page summary at the front that Evelyn had written that morning and that read like something between a legal brief and a piece of particularly precise journalism. He read the summary first. Then he went back and read the full document. They talked while he was reading. Mrs. Patel refilled his coffee without being asked. Ellen sat with her hands folded and watched him the way she had watched thousands of people read things she had put in front of them with the patience of someone who knew the text was doing its work and didn't need to help it. He got to the email thread. His reading pace slowed. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set the page down and looked at Evelyn. "Alderman," he said. "Yes, you know who that is." "I have a strong suspicion," she said. "I had to leave the confirmation to you." Calloway looked at Michael. Michael looked at Calloway. "There is a Roger Alderman," Calloway said slowly, "who works as an independent consultant to the Silver Creek Planning Commission. Has done so for 4 years. He's not a commissioner, he's not elected, but public-facing. He advises on development impact assessments." Evelyn said nothing. He would have access to every internal planning document, door proposal, every timeline. Calloway looked at the email. He would know before the vote which way it was going, because he'd be the one writing the analysis that informed the vote. "Yes," Evelyn said. It was. "And he wouldn't have to rig the vote," Calloway said, have to himself, working through it. He'd just have to wait for a vote that was going the right direction and then sell the timing information. It would be legitimate. The process would look clean. Corruption is in the information sharing, not the vote itself, which is why it's been so hard to see," Evelyn said. "Well, nothing about the Planning Commission's actions looks wrong. The Development Corridor is a real project with real public benefit. It will pass, and it will be legitimate. God is entirely in how someone used advanced knowledge of that vote to buy up properties before anyone else knew they were in the path of development." Calloway put the page down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. "Only 2 years," he said, "and it was not directed at anyone in particular. Just the weight of it." "Detective," Evelyn said. Up. "There's one more thing," she said. Michael looked at her. He had not known there was one more thing. She had said she would tell him the rest of it, and she had, or he had thought she had, and now she was saying, there was one more thing, with the quiet tone of someone setting down the last piece of a structure they have been building for a very long time. "I went back to the Planning Commission correspondence log this morning," she said. "You came. There were 2 new emails in the log added in the last 12 hours. One was from our alderman to the commission chair. It was marked urgent." She slid a piece of paper across the table. Calloway picked it up. He read 4 lines and his entire face changed. Earl couldn't see the paper from where he was sitting. Touched Calloway's face instead, and that was enough. It went from the focused concentration of someone processing information to something that had more edges in it. Something sharper and more urgent. "He's withdrawing from the project," Calloway said, effective immediately. Citing personal reasons. He submitted it last night at 11:58 p.m. 11:58 p.m. 12 minutes after Michael had ended the phone call, with a carefully pleasant voice. Holmes absorbed that. He was told, Michael said. Never called me. Last night, they called Alderman right after, or before, or during. He thought about the voice. Plus, the way it had shifted, the way it had already known something was wrong, but before it had fully understood what. They're already pulling threads, trying to close the exposure before it spread. Which means they're scared, Garrett said from the doorway. I looked at him. He had let himself in one of the men from the outside rotation and was standing in the door frames with his jacket still on his arm and his phone in his hand. Sorry, the door was unlocked. I thought you should know Tony just called. Sir, he's been watching the Meridian website for the last hour. He held up his phone. The website went offline 15 minutes ago. Scottsdale office address on their registrations. Tony drove by. Office is empty. Calloway was already on his phone. Nodding, Michael said. Trying to, Calloway said. And the way he said it was not a reassurance. It was a statement of intent. Already moving. Already standing. The coffee abandoned. He looked at Evelyn. I need to take this document. Officially, I need it logged as evidence today. It's yours, she said. Copies. Of course you did, he said. And it came out with something in it that was almost not quite, almost fond. He picked up the document, looked at Michael, nodding. The emails from Alderman, the phone logs from the car, Polsky's footage. He counted on his fingers 7 individual pieces of evidence that connect. This document is the thread that runs through all of them. He paused. I need to make 3 calls. I need to be at the station in 20 minutes. He looked at Michael to not do anything that would complicate this in the next 48 hours. Define complicate, Michael said. I mean, anything that isn't talking to witnesses or answering your phone when I call. Michael held his gaze. Understood. Calloway left. The door closed behind him. The kitchen settled back into its particular quiet. Thus, Mrs. Patel sat down heavily in her chair. She looked at the table. She looked at the spot where the document had been. At Evelyn, is it over? She said. Evelyn looked at her carefully. What we were responsible for, she said, is over. The rest of it is going to take time. There will be more questions. There will be lawyers. There will be things that move slowly and things that move in ways we can't predict. She paused. The piece that we could do, the part that was ours, yes. I think that's done. Mrs. Patel nodded. She nodded for a long time, actually longer than the gesture required. The way nodding sometimes became a way of processing something the body understood before the mind had finished with it. Then she looked at Evelyn and said, Gerald would have been so proud of you. Evelyn's face did the thing it did rarely, the small movement around the eyes that meant something large was being held very carefully. He would have found Henry Kowalski months earlier, she said. He would have, yes, probably. He also would have burned the soup 3 times during the investigation and forgotten to pay 2 bills and lost the car keys every single morning. Miss Hill's voice was firm and also warm in the way that warmth sometimes needed to be firm to get through. You did what you knew how to do, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Evelyn looked at her hands. Michael, who had been standing by the window through all of this, said nothing. Some moments were not for sons. He understood that. He waited. At 3:45 that afternoon, Detective Calloway called from the station. Michael answered before the second ring. A stop on Voss, Calloway said. Phoenix Field office of the FBI, my Scottsdale contact escalated this morning after I sent the file. I'm at the airport. Phoenix Sky Harbor. Is that a one-way ticket? Michael said, where to? Doesn't matter where to, Calloway said. He's not going. Michael closed his eyes for half a second. An alderman? Being brought in for questioning. He hasn't lawyered up yet, which either means he thinks he can explain it or he doesn't understand yet how much we have. Calloway paused. Given your mother's document, I'm guessing he's about to have a very clarifying conversation. Brandon Keller? Still in custody. Lawyer came this morning. We added charges based on the testimony from Darius Cole and the connection to Meridian. He's looking at significantly more than the original assault charge. Another pause, all starting to talk. Slowly, in the direction of cooperation. Michael thought about Brandon Keller in the back of the police cruiser, confidence draining out of him on that corner, then dropping from his fingers. And Darius? Darius Cole gave us information that connected 3 separate incidents to specific instructions from the coordinator account, Calloway said. Operation has been formally noted. I've spoken to the DA's office, looking at his situation carefully, given the nature and quality of what he provided. A pause. He's 19. He came in voluntarily. He told the truth. Those things count. Michael thought about Darius in Mrs. Paul's kitchen that morning, both hands around the teacup. I'm trying to be honest because I think being honest is the only thing that's actually useful right now. Good, Michael said. One more thing, Calloway said. Voice shifted not to something less professional, but to something slightly more human underneath the professional. Document your mother built. The notebook, the timeline, the email thread, the cross-referencing my FBI contact reviewed it this afternoon as part of the initial case package. She asked me to pass along a specific message. Michael waited. She said, and I'm quoting directly, she said, whoever did this documentation has better investigative instincts than half my field agents. Michael looked across the kitchen at his mother, Aradas, who was sitting at the table writing something in a new notebook page, writing small and steady and unhurried, as if the last 24 hours had been, in some essential way, simply another day of doing what she had always done. Claire, he said. He hung up and looked at her for a moment before he crossed the room, up when he stopped beside her. Voss is in custody, he said. Alderman is being questioned. Brandon is talking. Iris is going to be okay. She absorbed this, not dramatically. The way she absorbed everything, thoroughly, quietly, as if information was something to be organized rather than reacted to. She said, the FBI agent who reviewed your documentation said you have better investigative instincts than half her field agents. Something crossed Evelyn's face. It was brief and complicated, and he could entirely name it. Part of it was the recognition of being seen, actually seen in a way that had not always been guaranteed. Part of it was something quieter, something that might have been Gerald. Kind, Evelyn said. She's accurate, Michael said. Evelyn looked at her notebook. She looked at the new page, had a heading at the top that he leaned in to read. It said, things that still need to be done. He almost laughed. There are still 11 families who haven't given formal statements, she said. Correspondence with Alderman needs to be fully cross-referenced with the offer letters. I want to make sure that every homeowner who received a below-market offer understands that those offers are now connected to an ongoing fraud investigation and that any pressure they continue to feel. Mom, she looked up. He said, the part you built, it worked. You can put the notebook down. She looked at him. Then she looked at the notebook. Then she put the pen down deliberately on the table beside it. For today, she said. Oh, he agreed. That evening, Carol drove her home, not to Mrs. Patel's, home to the house on Oak Street that she and Gerald had bought in 9,987. Had a garden in the backyard that Michael had rebuilt the fence around 3 years ago. Had Gerald's coffee still on the shelf at Hargrove's because the owner kept ordering it even when the supply chain made it difficult. On the development corridor, the house that Meridian had wanted, house that was now at the center of a federal investigation, house that was and had always been hers. She stood in the front hallway for a moment after Michael unlocked the door. Just stood there. He didn't say anything. He understood that she needed a moment to let the house receive her back, to let the particular silence of a home that has been empty for a day register and settle. Then she moved inside. She went to the kitchen and ran water into the kettle. She set out 2 cups. She moved through the space the way she always moved through it naturally, hesitation, as if the house and the woman were a single system that functioned best together. Holt sat at the kitchen table. He noticed something on the counter that he hadn't seen there before, a small jewelry box, velvet, the kind you got from a good jeweler. He looked at it, looked at his mother. She turned from the kettle and saw him looking. I stopped at Chandler Street while you were with Calloway this morning, she said. You say anything, it was 2 blocks and a 5-minute errand, and I was perfectly safe. He opened his mouth. Michael, he closed it. She picked up the jewelry box and brought it to the table. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of white cotton, was Gerald's pendant, the compass rose, that had traveled 50 years through their life, together, hanging from a new chain. The repair was clean and exact. If you didn't know where the break had been, you wouldn't find it. She lifted it from the box and held it for a moment. Bonners. Then she reached back and clasped it around her neck. Carol watched her hands, the steadiness of them, the steadiness of someone forcing calm, the steadiness of someone who genuinely had it, who had built it over 78 years out of every hard thing she had moved through and chosen not to be destroyed by. Gerald used to say, she said, sitting down across from him, there's that the things that get broken and mended are stronger than the things that were never broken at all. Because the break shows you where the weak point was, and then you can reinforce it properly. Michael looked at the pendant against her collarbone. About the watch he dropped. He said he had repaired 4 times. He was talking about the watch, she agreed. Other things. The kettle came to a boil. She got up to pour it. He watched her. He thought about what she had said before on the bench outside Hargrove's. She had never needed someone to save her. She had needed someone to show up. He had spent 23 years on the road, becoming the kind of man who showed up for the chapter, the work, for whatever the moment required. He had come back to Silver Creek because she had mentioned a garden, and he had understood the subtext. He had rebuilt fences and eaten Sunday dinners and parked outside her house in the dark on the nights he hadn't told her about. The nights when something in him needed to make sure the lights were on. He had thought for 3 years that he was taking care of her. Only now, sitting in her kitchen while the FBI processed her documentation and her lifetime's worth of paying attention to things rippled outward through a federal case, that he fully understood how much of that story he had gotten back. She set his tea in front of him and sat back down. What happens now? He said. Now there are statements and depositions and things that take time, she said. The families in the neighborhood start to understand that the pressure they were feeling was manufactured. Their homes are worth what they're worth, that nobody is coming to take anything from anyone. She looked at her cup. Now some of us go back to living our lives. And Darius, she was quiet for a moment. He came to apologize. He stayed to help. He told the truth when it cost him something. She looked up. I think Darius Cole is going to be fine. I think he made one turning and now he's going to make a different one. She paused. I'd like to check on him. After this is settled, I figured, Michael said. That reminds me of someone. Who? She looked at him steadily. Back at her. Mom, I was never... You were 21 years old and very angry at everything, she said presently. And then you found people who gave the anger somewhere to go that wasn't destructive. And you became someone different. She picked up her tea. Well, I'm saying, he sat with that for a moment. How do you know these things? He said. I was a librarian, she said. Librarians everything. And I have been watching you for 51 years. Outside the house, one of the 12 men sat in a parked car on Oak Street, as Michael had asked him to, not because there was still a concrete threat, though the status of that threat was still being assessed, because it was the kind of thing you did when someone you respected had gone through something significant and the night was long and it was easy enough to be there. His name was Doyle. He was 53 years old and had been riding since he was 22 and had never been good at explaining to people outside the Brotherhood why some things were just done, not because anyone required them, because there was a rule about it, but because when a thing was right, it was simply right, and that was enough reason. His window cracked. The night was cold. He had coffee in a thermos and a radio turned down low. At 9:17, the front door of Evelyn's house opened. She stepped onto the porch. She stood there for a moment. Then she looked in his direction, directly, precisely, any pretense of not knowing he was there, and she raised one hand in a small wave. He raised his back. She went inside. He stayed until midnight, and then Garrett came to relieve him, and the night continued its business. Her light in Evelyn Whitmore's kitchen stayed on until 10:30 and then went off. The house on Oak Street was quiet, and outside it, someone was watching over it who had not been asked to and would not stop until it was no longer necessary. Maybe a little past that because that was the kind of people they were. Brandon Keller's lawyer came back to the jail at 7 the next morning with a revised position on his client's level of cooperation. The revision had apparently been prompted by a conversation the lawyer had with the DA's office about the specific charges being considered in light of the connection to Meridian. Thus, the list of charges, once that connection was formally added, was long enough that the lawyer had spent 40 minutes on the phone with Brandon explaining each one separately. By 7:15, Brandon was talking, not in the careful, managed way of someone giving the minimum, in the full, cascading way of someone who has finally understood the size of the thing they were standing inside and has decided that the only rational response is to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the center of it. He gave them the coordinator's contact protocol. He gave them 3 additional phone numbers he had been given in August and instructed to use only for emergencies. He gave them the names of 2 other people in Silver Creek who had been receiving payments from Meridian for other services, neither of whom were Marcus, neither of whom were Darius, of whom were people in positions that would explain certain things that had previously been unexplained. One of them was a code enforcement officer who had been approving rapid property condition assessments for properties Meridian, was interested in assessments that made the properties look worse than they were, lowered their assessed value, and gave Meridian a stronger argument for their below-market offers. The one made Calloway call Michael at 7:45 in the morning. Sure. Michael answered before the second ring. "I need you to tell your mother something," Calloway said. A brief pause. "Tell her she was right," Calloway said. "The Tuesday group." Michael went very still. "A Center Tuesday group," Calloway said. "Someone who runs that group, someone who was present at every meeting where the homeowners discussed the offers they'd received and the incidents afterward, has been in contact with Meridian. Putting back names, amounts, who was considering accepting, others, who was digging in." He paused. They knew so much about the neighborhood because someone in the neighborhood was telling them. Michael thought about his mother at the Tuesday group, listening, noticing, writing things down. 4 months of watching something she couldn't quite name. He said, "I don't know," Calloway said. She said there was a pattern. She said the incidents seemed too targeted. So, in the notebook, page 17, third paragraph, the response time between refusals and incidents is too consistent to be coincidental. And with access to the group's conversations is involved. Michael looked at the ceiling of his truck. "I wrote that in September," Calloway said. "She didn't name anyone. Observation is there. The instinct is there." Another pause. "Well, she was right, Michael. She was right about all of it." He ended the call. He drove to Oak Street. He knocked on his mother's door at 8 in the morning, and she opened it in her house coat with a cup of tea already in her hand, which meant she'd for a while, which meant she'd been thinking. At his face. "Come in," she said. "Tell me." He came in. He told her. She listened without speaking, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at her tea, and then she said, not with satisfaction, with triumph, but with the quiet, complicated weight of someone who had been right about something they very much wished they had been wrong about. "I didn't know who. I just knew the information was getting out somehow." She paused. "Harry, it was her." "Who?" She looked up. "It was a woman who ran the group," she said. I can see it now. Certain things she said, the way she redirected conversations, discussions that felt slightly off." She closed her eyes briefly. She was lonely. I think she was frightened too in her own way. She stopped. "That doesn't make it right. I don't think she understood what she was part of." "Not fully, Mom," Michael said gently. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. I'm telling you what I think because it's true, and because the truth of why people do things matters, even when what they did is wrong." She looked at him. To have to face what she did. "I hope she has someone beside her when she does." He looked at her. about everything she had done in the last 24 hours. Everything she had built over 4 months, everything she had held on to and then let go of at exactly the right moment. About a woman who had just found out that someone from her own community had been working against her. And the first thing she'd said was, "I hope she has someone beside her." "Her," he said, and stopped. "What?" He shook his head. There wasn't a sentence for what he was trying to say. He was 51 years old and had ridden through 30 states, and he did not have words for this particular thing. She looked at him for a moment. Then she set down her tea and reached across and put her hand on the side of his face, the way she had done when he was a child, when he was small enough to be reached easily. Marauders, when the world was something she was still teaching him to navigate. Not small. The gesture was the same, I know, she said softly. Oh, he covered her hand with his. They stayed like that for a moment. Then she said, in her ordinary voice, the warm one, and that meant dinner was ready, or it was going to rain tomorrow. I make breakfast. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday. It's Thursday. I know what day it is. He almost laughed. She stood up and went to the kitchen, and he heard the sounds of her moving through the space that had been hers for 37 years. The familiar sounds of her presence, which he had been cataloging without knowing it, adding to the store of things he would have. Later, when the day came that the house on Oak Street was quiet in a different way. Not yet. That was not today. Today she was here, and she was moving through her kitchen, and the compass rose was around her neck, and the evidence she had spent 4 months building was working its way through the system she had trusted it to. Outside on Oak Street the morning was cold and clear, and a terrier named something he didn't know was probably already on its walk with Henry Kowalski. Had 7 videos and a composition notebook and 43 years of paying attention to this particular block. Earl sat at the kitchen table. He listened to his mother make breakfast, and he understood finally and completely something he should have understood years ago, that the strongest people he had ever known were not strong because they never broke. They were strong because they knew exactly what to do with the breaking. Breakfast she made was eggs and toast, and the kind of coffee that Gerald had liked strong enough to hold a spoon upright, he used to say, which was an exaggeration, but only just ate without being told to eat more, which was unusual enough that Evelyn noticed it and said nothing, because some things were better received in silence than in acknowledgement. At the kitchen table together, the way they had sat at it on Sunday evenings for 3 years, and the morning moved around them the way mornings did when the worst of something had passed, and the ordinary world was slowly resuming its shape. At 9:15, Michael's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression did something specific. The tension that had been living in the set of his jaw since Tuesday afternoon released. Slightly, in a way that was visible if you knew where to look. Evelyn knew where to look. Voss made a statement, he said, operating with the FBI. She set down her coffee cup. Love it, she said. That's what Calloway says. Love it. The full operation. The 3 towns. The shell companies. Remember the information he received from Alderman. Michael looked up from his phone. But he's giving them everything. She was quiet for a moment. He thinks it's his best deal, she said. Probably. He's right, she said. Which means the people who needed protecting most, the homeowners, they're going to have documentation now. The man who ran the operation himself. She paused. That matters. That's not just a case. That's a record. And they can point to when people try to tell them it wasn't real. Michael looked at her, already thinking about what comes after. I've been thinking about what comes after since September, she said, simply. There's the legal case is Calloway's. What happens to the neighborhood after the legal case, that's something else. He set his phone down. What do you mean? She folded her hands on the table. Even families who spent months feeling afraid in their own homes, who second-guessed whether to answer the door, who looked at their own community and felt like something was wrong but couldn't name it. She looked at him. Knowing that it was organized, that it was deliberate, that helps. It explains things, but it doesn't automatically repair what the fear did to people. It doesn't put back the trust. She paused. That takes time, and it takes people paying attention. And I intend to pay attention. Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What does that look like?" "It looks like the Tuesday group continuing to meet," she said, under different leadership. "It looks like people in this neighborhood knowing each other's names and situations, the way Henry Kowalski knows every car on the block. It looks like the dry cleaner who came out to his doorstep understanding that he can come out to his doorstep, that it matters when he does." She looked at her coffee, like ordinary things done consistently, which is how all of the best things get built. He studied her. "You've been planning this too," he said. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's a difference. With you," he said. "I'm not sure there is." She almost smiled. Elias Cole called at 10:30. Hers, not Michael's phone, Evelyn's. She had given him the number the morning before at Mrs. Cole's kitchen table between his second cup of tea and the moment he had left quietly, the way he had come, with less weight on him than he'd arrived with. Not none. Never none. Not yet. That kind of weight took time. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was careful, testing the reception. "Darius. I heard the officer called me this morning." Boss was cooperating. He said, "My name was formally noted as a cooperating witness." A pause. "There." He said, "The DA was looking at my situation." "That's what Michael told me as well." "I don't know what that means exactly." "For me, what happens, it means people with authority over that decision are paying attention to what you did," she said, "which is the best position to be in." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing the particular rhythm of someone holding something in that wanted to come out sideways. "Sure. I keep thinking about the corner," he said finally. "Letters. Tuesday, I keep running it back. All the points where I could have..." He stopped. "Didn't stop it. I was standing right there and I didn't stop it." "No," she said. "You didn't." He'd expected her to soften it. She didn't. She had found, in 31 years of working with young people, who were genuinely reckoning with something, didn't need the edges smoothed. They needed the edges to be real, so that the reckoning was real. "But you spoke," she said. "You said it didn't feel right." I tried to reach him. And then when it mattered, the police were there, when the easy thing would have been to say as little as possible and protect yourself, you told the truth. Completely. "That's not," he exhaled, "that's not enough, is it?" "It's not everything," she said. "It's not nothing. What it is a start." She paused. "Dare you in school?" A brief silence. "Are you working? Odd jobs?" "Nothing regular." "There is a library," she said. "On Chandler Street. The director there is a woman named Patricia Osei, who I have known for 11 years. She runs a tutoring program on Wednesday and Friday evenings, adult education, GD prep, some vocational certification work. They need people who can sit with teenagers who are struggling and not make them feel stupid for struggling." She let that sit. "A tutor," he said. "You're 19, you're smart, and you've made decisions you regret, and you're honest about it," she said. "You considerably more useful to a struggling 16-year-old than someone who has never made a wrong turn in their life." Another silence. Longer this time. "You'd put in a word?" he said. "I'll call Patricia this afternoon." He didn't say anything for a moment. I heard him do something with his breath, a small sound that was quickly controlled, the sound of someone who had been braced for a door to be closed and had instead found it open. "Hi," he said. And it was a real question, not rhetorical, not self-pitying, just genuine. Just 19 years old and trying to understand the world. "Ours. Because you came to a stranger's door to apologize," she said. "And then you stayed to help. And that is not nothing. Serious. That is in fact rather a lot." She heard him exhale. "Hi," he said quietly. "Okay, I'll call Patricia today. Thank you." "Mrs. Whitmore. Come by sometime," she said. "The garden needs attention, and I could use someone who can reach the high branches." He almost laughed. Almost. She'd take it. She called Patricia Osei at 11, who had the particular energy of someone who ran an underfunded program on passion and organizational genius, and not enough hours in the day. Listened to Evelyn describe Darius for 4 minutes, and then said, "Wednesday." "Just like that?" Evelyn said. And Patricia said, "You have never in your life recommended someone who wasn't worth my time. I'll send him through orientation, and we'll see. But yes, Lubbers. Just like that, Evelyn thanked her and hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of her kitchen with the compass rose warm against her throat and the sound of Michael in the other room on his own phone, talking to Garrett about something she wasn't listening to carefully enough to follow. About a library on Chandler Street that had once been her library, not the building, which was different, but the work which was the same. Work of putting the right thing in front of the right person at the right moment and trusting that they would know what to do with it. She had been doing that her whole life. She had not stopped. All that changed the pitch of everything came at 1 in the afternoon. Callaway, it was Callaway. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before, something that was not quite emotion, but was closer to it than he usually allowed himself to be in professional communication. "I need to tell you something," he said, officially, on behalf of the investigation, and also just personally. "Go ahead," she said. Roger Alderman gave his full statement this morning. Operating. He confirmed the information sharing arrangement with Meridian, confirmed it began 14 months ago, confirmed the specific corridor details he provided and the timeline. A pause, and he said something else in the statement. He was asked how the operation had been discovered, what had broken it open, what had given investigators the angle of entry they needed. Callaway paused again. He said it was a retired librarian with a spiral notebook who saw the pattern before anyone else was looking. Evelyn was quiet. And he wasn't complimentary about it, Callaway clarified. He was frustrated. He said it in the tone of someone who cannot understand how the thing they were most careful about was the thing that got them. Another pause. That's what he said. He said, a retired librarian saw it. She looked at her hands, heard the notebook on the table beside her coffee cup. Heard that it was the notebook, she said. It was more than the notebook, Callaway said. And you know it. What happens to the families, she said. There's the 11 homeowners, the ones who were targeted. Does the investigation help them? Practically. The fraud charges, if they stick, I believe they will open civil liability for Meridian and for Voss personally. The affected homeowners can pursue damages. Separately from the criminal case. He paused. I recommend they get legal counsel. There are organizations that handle exactly this kind of case. Provide a list. Please do, she said. Send it to me, and I'll make sure everyone has it. Of course you will. Judge Silence said. She heard it clearly. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I have been a detective for 22 years. I want you to know this case. We came together. The foundation your documentation provided this is not typical. What you did was not typical. I was a librarian, she said. He meant everything. With respect, he said, and she could hear that he meant it completely. It was considerably more than that. She accepted that. With false modesty, not with performance. Just with the quiet acknowledgement of someone who knew their own work and was not embarrassed to recognize it. Thank you, detective, she said, for taking it seriously when I gave it to you. Thank you for building something worth taking seriously, he said. Michael found her in the backyard at 2 in the afternoon. She was in the garden, not working in it, just standing near it, in the particular way she stood there sometimes when she was thinking and needed the garden's version of quiet, which was different from the house's version. Fuller. Gerald had built those beds from reclaimed wood in 9,991, and they had been rebuilt once. They're Michael 3 years ago, but the bones of them were still Gerald's. She could feel that when she stood close enough. It came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. They stood together in the October cold and looked at the garden. As end of season and slightly ragged in the way that living things got when the growing was done and the rest was coming. Well, Garrett called, he said eventually. What did he say? He said the neighborhood is talking. The way it was talking before, not the quiet. Isolated, afraid kind of talking, the other kind. He paused. Mrs. Delgado is having people over on Saturday. She's calling it a block check-in. Agenda. Just neighbors. Good, Evelyn said. Henry Kowalski is bringing his camera, Michael said. There was something in the way he said it that was almost a laugh. There's he is. Michael shifted beside her. She felt him work toward. Something felt the shape of it, the way you could feel the shape of a sentence before the words arrived. Been thinking, he said. I know. I want to. I think I want to do something. Calmly. Not vigilante. Nothing that complicates the case. Organized. The way the chapter is organized. A way to be useful in neighborhoods like this one. People who need someone to show up who don't always have stopped. Have it figured out. She looked at him. He was 51 years old and had the hands of someone who had fixed more engines than he could count, and the eyes of someone who had spent 2 decades learning when to move and when to wait. And he was standing in her garden, looking at her with the expression of a man who had something large and not yet shaped inside him, and needed someone to tell him it had form. You don't need to have it figured out, she said. You need to start. The figuring out happens after you start. Is that librarian wisdom? It's human wisdom, she said. Libraries just have a lot of examples of it. He nodded. Hello. Slowly, the way he nodded when he was committing to something. She looked back at the garden. Plant something before the ground freezes, she said. It goes in now. It winters over and comes up in spring. He looked at her. Talking about the garden? He said. We're always talking about the garden, she said. Also, never just talking about the garden. He almost said something. Then he went to the small shed at the edge of the yard and came back with the trowel and the bag seed garlic she had bought in September and not yet gotten to. And he got down on one knee beside the nearest bed and started working the soil. And she watched him for a moment before she got the second trowel and came to kneel beside him. But in silence, the ground was cold. The work was simple and specific and real in the way that garden work was always real, the particular satisfaction of your hands in earth, of doing a thing that had a direct and visible result, of putting something in the ground and trusting the season. After a while, Michael said, without looking up from what he was doing, kind of like this, the whole thing. Mom. She would have thought it was, he stopped. Looked at him. Gerald, he said. Sorry. I meant I've been thinking about him. So have I, she said. I could have found a Falski months ago. She laughed. Loud, involuntarily, the real kind. It surprised her and she let it. That's exactly what I said, she told him. Michael looked at her. The surprise on his face became something warmer. He would have been so proud of you, he said. She looked at the soil under her hands, at the small papery cloves set into the earth at their proper depth and spacing, the way the instructions said, the way Gerald had shown her the first time 30 years ago. Oh, she said softly. I know he would have. She pressed a clove into the ground and covered it with soil and moved to the next one. 3 weeks later, Harlan Voss was formally charged on 6 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal housing discrimination statutes. Her alderman entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of breach of fiduciary duty and improper disclosure of non-public government information. Charges were sufficient, Calloway told Michael, to ensure that both the criminal and civil cases would proceed with the kind of momentum that did not easily reverse. And Keller, who had cooperated fully in the end, faced reduced charges and mandatory counseling. His lawyer called it a good outcome. Brandon in the county holding facility said nothing publicly. Elias Hall Cole, who heard about it secondhand through the officer who had become something like a check-in presence in his life over the week since the corner, said simply, I hope he figures it out. He said it without bitterness. Evelyn heard about it from Michael, who heard it from the officer, about what it meant to be 19 and already practicing that kind of hope, the difficult kind you chose, not because it was easy, but because the alternative was carrying something too heavy for the road you were trying to walk. Darius showed up at the library on Chandler Street on a Wednesday at 5:50. Parsha Osi put him with a 16-year-old named Marcus, different Marcus, coincidentally, who was 3 weeks from a math exam he needed to pass and had given up on the idea of passing it. Darius sat with him for 2 hours. He didn't tell Marcus it was easy. Told him it was hard and doable, and that the difference between those two things was effort over time. Darius passed the exam. Darius came back the following Wednesday, and the one after that. The block check-in at Mrs. Joe's on Saturday was 31 people in a living room that comfortably held 15. Henry Kowalski came without the camera, but with his terrier, Laraz, who was the unexpected social success of the evening. Three families who had not known each other's names 6 weeks ago exchanged phone numbers. Two people who had received letters from Meridian and not told anyone found out, for the first time, that their neighbors had received the same letters, and the relief on their faces, the specific relief of a burden that stops being private, was the kind of thing that Evelyn filed away in the same place she had always filed such things of her that kept evidence of why the work was worth doing. Michael stood in the corner of Mrs. Delgado's living room with Garrett and talked quietly about something she didn't try to overhear. Whatever it was, Garrett was nodding. Mrs. Patel found Evelyn near the kitchen and said, "Really, thank you. Not for anything specific, for all of it. For the shape the last 3 weeks had taken." Evelyn put her hand over Mrs. Paul's and squeezed once. "Thank you for the tea," she said. Paul laughed. "Too sweet." "Perfect," Evelyn said. "Both times." On a Sunday evening 6 weeks after the corner of Maple and 4th, Michael came for dinner. He came the way he always came, on time, from the bakery on Elm, that he always said was just something they had at the register, and that Evelyn knew perfectly well. He drove past his direct route to buy. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, and they ate and they talked, and it was, on its surface, exactly what it had been every Sunday evening for 3 years. Except that it was different. They both knew it, and neither of them named it, because some changes were better lived than described. After dinner, she brought out the garlic from the refrigerator, not the planted kind, which was in the ground until spring, but a braid she'd bought at the farmer's market, which Gerald had always kept over the kitchen window. It up. Michael looked at it. Then he took it and stood on the step stool she kept by the counter and hung it from the hook that had held the same hook for 37 years, in the same place Gerald had put it the first time, 989, when they were younger and the world was smaller and the house was new. He stepped down. They looked at it together. "Okay," he said. "Yes," she said. She reached up and touched the compass rose at her throat. The new chain was smooth under her fingers, the brake repaired and reinforced, stronger now at the mended place than it had been before. The way Gerald had always said the broken things were. And Evelyn Whitmore stood in her kitchen on Oak Street, a house she had defended, without ever asking to be saved, funded by the evidence of a life lived with both hands and full attention. She understood as she had understood at 78 on a Tuesday afternoon, on a public corner, when a young man had told her nobody was coming, that the strongest thing she had ever done was simply refuse to. The person her circumstances tried to make her. Grief. Not the pressure, not the cruelty on that corner, or the months of organized fear designed to hollow out her sense of safety. None of it had made her smaller. All of it had shown her exactly how large she already was. He had come to save her. Nobody needed to. She had always known the way home.